Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. My name is Zachary Stillwell, and today I'll be speaking about my war game, the Northwest African Campaign. I wanted to start off by thanking Brant Guillory, Merle Robinson, and Dr. James Starrett for giving me this opportunity to present at the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a captain in the U.S. Army and a student at the Command and General Staff College. I'm currently pursuing my master's in military arts and sciences through the war game design track with Dr. Starrett. And then while I am a member of the U.S. Army and the Command General Staff College, any views or opinions I present here are purely my own. So what I'll present to you today is my game as it is in progress. The title Northwest African Campaign is draft and still pending final title. I'm going to cover why this game matters, what it is designed to achieve, and a brief history around the scenario. And then I'll dive into the game mechanics. So feel free to ask any questions at any point. I'm happy to also engage in discussion at the end. I'll note that the picture on the right is actually from a military artist, Corporal M.D. Becker, and that is of the port at Oran, Africa, one of the landing sites from Operation Torch. Slide, please. Okay, so first off, the purpose. So it's to teach players about making operational level decisions in a joint environment and using Operation Torch in the Tunisian Campaign from World War II as a situation. So some key factors to consider that the game considers are theater entry by joint forcible entry. So think amphibious assaults and airborne assaults. Key terrain, so seizing key terrain such as ports and airfields, and then cities and mountains. Third, limited resources. Players will have to think about how they allocate their limited resources on the land, sea, and air in order to achieve their end state. So a little bit of background on the scenario. So this takes place from November of 1942 to May of 1943 in World War II. To set the scene, the Axis powers have reached their high watermark. In the Soviet Union, the Battle of Stalingrad is about to commence, and Stalin was pushing the Western Allies to open a second front. After discussions between Prime Minister Churchill and President Roosevelt, the Western Allies decided to land in North Africa as they did not believe they were prepared for landings in France. In Egypt, Field Marshal Montgomery's 8th Army has just defeated Field Marshal Rommel's Afrika Korps at the Second Battle of El Alamein the month prior. Rommel is racing back west with Montgomery pursuing him. The landing of General Eisenhower's combined forces in Morocco and Algeria would enable the Allies to squeeze the Axis out of Africa. Doing so, they'd be able to seize the city of Tunis, which would enable an invasion of southern Europe. So this is the scenario and the decisions which I'm seeking to model. Slide, please. Okay, so why this scenario? There are already several excellent games which cover combat in North Africa, so I wanted to take a moment to discuss why I think this game is unique and why it matters. The bottom line is it's an excellent scenario to teach operational decision-making in joint operations. So in Operation Torch in the Tunisian Campaign, you can easily model land, air, and maritime domains. Both players will have to conduct theater entry operations and make decisions regarding the deployment of their forces. Next, there are sufficient operational complexities which force players to operate in uncertainty. So the Vichy French are a variable which the Allied player has some, but not all control over. The Vichy French will initially oppose the Allies, but then at some point will stand down. and then that allow the Allies to progress onto Tunisia. Now, thirdly, the campaign has two distinct parts. So the landings and then the battles in Tunisia. This requires players to sequence and time their operations to create a decisive effect. So what it means is the players got to think several turns in advance in all three of the domains. They need to consider, how they use their air forces, about when they move their airbases forward to ensure that they always have sufficient air coverage. They'll have to think through their naval operations, and how do they apply the naval power? Do they support ground forces? Do they interdict enemy reinforcements, or do they just try and gain sea control? Should you land effectively in Morocco and Algeria, but you don't transition well into Tunisia, then the Allied player will face a very well prepared Axis force that is hard to remove. If you fail to secure lines of supply via multiple ports, then your combat units will be in the right place, but without the logistics needed to conduct the operation. So finally, I want to draw your eyes to the right, to that graphic. This is a chart which lists games which represent either Operation Torch and/or the Tunisian Campaign in accordance with the different levels of warfare from the U.S. Military Joint Publication 5-0, Joint Planning. So in joint planning, military operations are divided into the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Strategic deals in global and national level strategy. Operational focuses on campaigns, and tactical focuses on battles, to put it simply. So I believe this game is valuable because no other games that I found have focused on both Operation Torch and the Tunisian Campaign at the operational level in a way that lets players make decisions. This scenario exists in a variety of excellent strategic and tactical level games, but I don't think they necessarily give the players the opportunity to learn the specific lessons that I'm trying to teach through my game. So my game is represented by that blue oval, and you can see a variety of other very well crafted games that just focus on different areas of the campaign. Slide, please. Okay, so the objective. I'm going to discuss this is the objective of the game. It's going to replicate the historical goal, which is for the Allies to seize Tunis and the Axis to retain Tunis by the end of turn 10. Tunis is the key terrain operationally because it's critical for both sides to accomplish their mission due to its major port, airfield, and geographically important location. If the Allied player completes their objective within the 10 turns, then they have matched history or beaten it. If the Axis player retains Tunis for 10 turns, then they will have beaten history and further delay an invasion of southern Europe, perhaps buying the Axis forces more time to succeed elsewhere. Strategically, removing all Axis forces from North Africa will further stress the Axis war machine and enable the Allied forces to begin their invasion into Sicily and Italy. There's two players, so the first person plays as the Allies, and the second person plays as the Axis, who will control the Vichy French until they stand down. Slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to show you the map, and as noted at the top, this is a draft map. This covers the northwest African coast and runs approximately 1,500 miles from Tripoli in the east to Casablanca in the west. In the north, it includes Sicily, Sardinia, and Gibraltar. The Atlas Mountains and the Sahara Deserts are the defining features on the south of the map. There are 14 cities on the map which offer defensive bonuses and logistical advantages. Ports are present with capacities ranging from 1 to 3, 3 being the best. Unimproved and improved airfields are also present in strategic locations, but the players can build more to support their objectives through expending resource cubes or supply cubes. Forces will enter the board through convoys from the Atlantic and the Tyrrhenian Sea, through airfields at Gibraltar and Sicily, and from Libya via Tripoli. There are 5 landing zones represented by landing craft. These enable the Allied player to choose their own objectives as opposed to being constrained to history. Then road networks are present, but generally restricted to the coastline. The thick blue lines you see represent air zones and facilitate air operations. Sea mines are present along the Strait of Tunisia, which threaten the freedom of maritime movement. And then As I mentioned, this is a draft version of the board. I continue to play test it and refine it, updating it, and I'm currently looking at how it works when I apply a more symmetric hex grid to create more consistency across movement. Slide, please. On this slide, I'll discuss the game pieces. So, as mentioned before, the players must consider the land, sea, and air domains. So on land, the pieces are regimental in size and will generally operate in groups equal to divisions or small corps. There's an implied combined arms aspect support to each unit type. At sea, the units are squadrons and strike groups. They provide multiple capabilities and are critical for maintaining sea lines of communication. In the air, they are divided into tactical air groups and strategic air groups. Tactical groups are designed to win aerial supremacy, and strategic groups are designed to degrade enemy operations on the land and at sea. The pieces themselves are marked with different information to enable the player to understand which number of sided dice they roll and how far they can move. Slide, please. So to provide you with an understanding of the game, I'll walk you through the opening setup. So the Axis player will first position a few of the spare Vichy French garrison units to guard the places they deem most critical. Second, both players will secretly place 2 submarines in the Mediterranean Sea using separate submarine placement sheets. And sir, if you can click once, please. And go ahead again. Third, the Allied player will determine the starting locations of each task force by placing them on one of the 5 eligible landing zones. So that multiple task forces can occupy the same landing zone area, but each must land in different specific locations, whether it be the city or the coastline. Each task force consists of an armor regiment, several infantry regiment, a supply cube in order to conduct their initial assault, and then a variety of different surface warfare ships. Fourth, the Allied player is going to determine where their paratroopers based in the United Kingdom on long-range transports will drop. So if you go ahead and click, they can land anywhere west of the city of Bizerta. This is a unique aspect which allows the Allied player to try and leverage the multi-domain aspect of this operation to try and give themselves an advantage during the joint forcible entry. They could aim to support one of the coastal objectives to increase the certainty of victory. They could try to seize a city that isn't yet occupied to gain key terrain and facilitate further movement, or they could position themselves as far forward as possible to block enemy advances and perhaps pin them in a more favorable location for the Allies. And then if you can click one more time, sir. So finally, play will begin with the Allied initiative. They'll execute simultaneous landings. The Allied player will determine which of the 3 domains are executed first: air, sea, or land. So with this, the stage is set and the battle may commence. Slide, please, sir. So as I mentioned earlier, gameplay will progress over 10 turns. They each represent between 2 to 4 weeks in time. This will help simulate that, taking the players from November of 1942 through a more wintry, muddy, cold season, and then all the way up to May of 1943 at the historical surrender of the Axis forces in North Africa. So initially, the Allies will hold the initiative by default due to their logistical superiority and their strategic goals. However, the Axis player will hold 3 seize the initiative tokens to use at their discretion, other than the first and last turns. On the first turn, the Allied player has it because of the commencement of the operation. And then on the last turn, it enables the Allied player to make one final push to seize Tunis. Seizing the initiative tokens, they represent careful planning and synchronization of unit actions, resources, supplies, and weather to determine the terms of battle for a temporary period of time. The player who holds the initiative will decide which the domains is executed and who makes their moves first. So this enables the player to leverage their strengths and weaknesses, either by shaping the battlefield before beginning a ground offensive or taking advantage of a favorable starting position to execute a battle before the other side has the opportunity to shape the environment. After all moves and combat are resolved, Both sides will deploy any troops which weren't destroyed on their transports. The Axis reinforcements will arrive on a schedule, meaning that the Axis player must make decisions and must make the most of what arrives. The Allied player can pick any reinforcements from their fleet to land, which gives them the ability and the responsibility to bring units into theater in a wise manner. So, for example, if you're the Allied player, you're going to need to look at bringing supplies, supply cubes in with the combat forces. If you try and rush all your combat forces in, you're likely to run into logistical issues that prevent you from being able to conduct attacks. If you bring in too much supplies and not enough combat troops, then you have the opposite problem of the Axis forces being able to have an opportunity to push you back and create more of a defensive perimeter around Tunis. So next, step 4, the Vichy French situation check. So there'll be a roll to determine if the Vichy French stand down and join the Allies. This will happen every turn until the Vichy until this roll is successful. So the Allied player must roll 2d6 to try and achieve a roll of 10. Now, the number of cities they control after this turn of combat are added to the roll. So that means if the Allies have captured 4 cities through their 3 landing forces and their airborne force, then there's a 72% chance the Vichy French will capitulate, which is historically the Vichy French stood down after about 48 hours. A delayed capitulation benefits the Axis as it gives them more time to get their forces into position before the Allies are able to break free and make an assault on Tunisia. So once the Vichy forces stand down, the Axis player will then get to do a roll of their own. They're going to roll a 1d6 in an off-board attempt to capture the Vichy fleet at Toulon. The roll only has a small chance of succeeding, but the Axis player can increase their odds by permanently reallocating reinforcements to the off-board fleet seizure operation. Should the Axis player seize any ships, they will arrive as reinforcements in 2 turns. So this is where the Axis player gets to make the decision to either prioritize getting ground forces into theater to set up a defensive perimeter, or paying a little bit of attention to the naval situation and trying to send forces to go seize the Vichy French fleet. Historically, essentially the entire fleet was scuttled, and in a close call, the Axis forces weren't able to get a hold of any. The great fear here is that should the Axis capture the French fleet and combine it with the Italian fleet, the 2 fleets combined would be very formidable for the Allies to try and gain sea control. All right, so finally, you conduct a victory conditions check. If at any time the turn ends with Allied forces in control of Tunis, then the game is over and the Allies win. If Axis forces still retain control at the end of the game, then they win. Slide, please. Okay, so next I'm going to cover the combat system. So I know this is a very word-heavy slide here, but hopefully this gives an understanding of what I'm trying to achieve. So I'll start off by drawing your attention to the top left. The system combines a victory check based on the total sum of the dice, along with a casualty check based on the number of 5s or greater rolled. So weaker units will typically be rolling a d6, like an infantry unit, whereas stronger units like an armor unit or a mechanized infantry unit will roll a d10 and d8 respectively. So what it means is that the stronger unit is, the more likely it is to not only create a casualty, but also to create a higher total sum number that allows you to win the battle. So the advantage of this system is that it allows for 8 different kinds of outcomes for 2 players, from 2 players each making a single roll of dice involved in the battle. So the rolls comprised of gathering the dice each unit rolls and then adding any modifiers. So to make a land attack, a player needs to spend a supply token, which represents about a division's worth of supplies, and that will enable 4 units to make an attack. So if they want to attack with 8 units, then they spend 2 supply tokens. Armies can gain an additional d6 die by spending additional supply cubes, which represents heavy expenditure of ammunition and fuel, or by having local maritime supremacy. Defenders can gain additional d6s also from spending supplies, but as well from the presence of entrenchments, fortifications, mountains, or cities. Aircraft and submarines supporting a battle can make direct attacks to destroy specific enemy units. So drawing your eyes to the right side, at the top. This is the different types of results you might run into. So the top half of the chart is a scenario where the attacker wins. That's where their total sum number is higher than the defender. The bottom half is vice versa, where the defender wins. The next column is just depicting the 8 different kinds of results. It's not related to a particular number that you roll. Then what I have in the number of 5+ rolls, so that's within the total roll, the relative number of 5s or higher that were rolled. So if they've got a high number of 5+ rolls, then that's a very good roll, whereas a low number maybe that they won the battle but didn't get that many 5s or 6s or higher. And on the right, that's my interpretation of what the roll could represent. So for example, if the attacker rolled high and the defender rolled low, and the attacker got quite a few 5s, but the defender didn't, then that would represent an effective attack. The attacker won, they inflicted casualties, and the defender was unable to stop their attack or deliver many casualties of their own in return. As you continue to go down, you'll see like if both sides rolled well, but the attacker rolled higher, then the attacker wins, but it's a costly.
We're doing an audio check here. I think my headphone turned off. Can I get a comment if you guys can still hear me? All right. You can hear me now? Okay, excellent. I apologize for that. Finishing up the slide here, that represents whether the attacker and defender, how well they fight, and who wins the battle. I'll pause for a second here to look through some of the comments. So the question about the area map. So the first question is, in the design, why did you decide to use an area map? Did you confirm historic movement rates to match the areas? So great question. I decided to opt for area initially based off of the unique terrain features that I was trying to model. So in North Africa, the prevalence of mountain passes means that units aren't going to naturally move at the same rate through the area. So I looked at an area map to try to model that some areas, particularly the coastal areas, you can move more quickly, whereas in the mountainous areas, it would be a little bit of slower movement speed. So that's my objective. The frictions I've run into is trying to match up the ability for air to cover an equal distance since they're not impacted by the terrain nearly so much. And that's where I've run into some frictions. And that's why I'm currently looking at adopting the hex method in order to smooth that out. So there's pros and cons to each. That's what I've been playtesting with the area, but I'm going to be looking at the hex method and then deciding which works better. So thank you for that question. All right, let's see your next question here. Due to the focus on domains, is there a synergy in how they are used? Absolutely, I think so. So first off, with the maritime environment, it's going to enable your land operations. The presence of maritime forces it's key to win the naval battle and to keep your maritime forces at pace with your land forces. That will enable your land forces to perform better. They get an additional die, which represents suppression that comes from onshore bombardment, the additional reconnaissance assets, the command and control ability that a significant maritime fleet can provide. From an air aspect, and I'll talk a little bit about this a little later as well, but there's a lot of targets that air can hit, but just because they can hit them doesn't mean that it's beneficial to your plan. So it's about focusing your efforts to achieve the overall objective. And the objective is to secure a piece of key terrain being Tunis. So looking at how to use the maritime and the air in combination with the land is key to actually to achieving the end goal and to winning. Okay, next question. The die roll results made for the Vichy stand down in German Navy capturing French ships seem critical. How did I validate that they gave a reasonable result in play, or is the variable considered a lesson to be learned? Okay, so great question. So in terms of Vichy stand down, that's huge political and diplomatic efforts to ensure that the Allied forces could effectively enter and not be severely resisted. What I looked for was a mix of history and a mix of playability. The Vichy French pretty much in this game won't last longer than 3 turns, which would be pretty long. That would represent them resisting for a month and a half, and that would be on the least likely side of the historical spectrum. The most likely side is that they would indeed stand down after the initial landings. So the way I modeled that was by doing a little bit of math on the dice that I use and the probabilities to make it far more likely that they do stand down. But I needed to make it significant enough of a chance that for them to not stand down to give the Axis player a bit of an opportunity. And so in essence, the modeling of about 75-25% split for the first turn means that you can pretty likely count on the Vichy French falling, but you have to plan that they may not fall. And so both sides will have to look at their plan in that way. In terms of the Toulon fleet, historically, the Vichy French were prepared to scuttle them, but it was a very close call. And in fact, a lot of several of the ships were boarded and then scuttled in process of being boarded, or the Vichy French delayed the Axis forces from boarding the ships by making small talk and trying to make them show passes. So with that, I've made the roll with the D6, where only on one of it, on a 6, will the Axis player capture all the ships, which are 6 different ships. And then on the middle rolls between 3, 4, 5, they'll capture a couple, and then on a 1 and 2, they don't capture anything. So that is, I'm granting a little bit of leniency to history in order to allow the Axis player to have an opportunity to make good on the Allied fear that the fleets might be combined. That's a great question. Okay, how is resupply determined for each side? So resupply is going to be based off of a pre-planned chart. For the Allies, there's a baseline of 1 resupply cube that you'll get at every turn, but you can increase it by capturing more ports. And if you capture the Moroccan ports, you can get up to 3 supply cubes a turn that come into the fleet, and then you have a bit of a base stockpile of 6 supply cubes that you start off with. So what it means is you always have some number of supply coming in, but you have to bring it into the port by selecting which convoy they'll enter in at, and then use it appropriately. The Axis is limited on supply, where they'll get typically between 1 and 2 supply a turn, but it's subject to being interdicted, particularly by the Allied forces at Malta. How long each turn is in actual time, day, week, month. So the turns are between 2 weeks and 4 weeks, giving enough time for a military division to execute a significant battle. 10 turns equals 5 months is the question. Generally, yes, a couple of those turns I have as 4 weeks long, particularly the December turn, in order to make it so long enough to match history there. So it's covering about a 6-month period with a little bit of the winter alibi turns. Okay, leadership components. So is there going to be a leadership component? Several North Africa games have specific counters for generals, like a Rommel counter. Great question. I've thought about that. At the moment, I don't have the leadership aspect involved in down at the individual unit level. One of the things I'm considering is implementing a division headquarters, and there could be a division modifier for how well a division fights. So then you would place multiple regiments underneath the division. It would reduce the number of pieces on the board, and then certain divisions could fight better than others. So it's a great question to ask. It's something I'm looking at. At the moment, I don't have it in this version I'm presenting you, but thank you for bringing that up. Okay, and then what are the weather effects? Do things slow down in the winter? Yes. So in the winter, you're going to lose a movement point, particularly in the muddy seasons. So 2 effects, movement and aircraft. So as mentioned, land units will reduce their speed by 1, and typically their movement points are between 2 and 4. And then aircraft, any aircraft that's not in an improved airfield will be grounded during that time. So only the improved airfields representing paved airfields would be able to execute their mission during those turns. Okay, and then here, I'll catch up on this. One more question here. What about Darlan's assassination effects on the Vichy French? Well, that's a good question. I think so. For this game, I haven't modeled in further on this. One of the things that's a little bit ahistorical is that I have the Vichy French come off the board as opposed to turning into the French corps that supported the Allies. Part of this is because the forces that I have coming in on the board as the Allies are built in number to generally equal the Allied force in size, and I don't want to overwhelm the Axis forces in a manner that breaks the game by putting far too many forces on the Allied side. So there's a little bit of a historical aspect where I'm kind of baking into the cake the Allied force coming in equals what they're going to have with the Vichy French forces. So the moment I haven't delved further into the political aspect with Darlan's assassination, other than the fact that the Vichy French will stand down at some unknown time. So you could say that the Vichy French role has an aspect on when they stand down, but not necessarily about who's actually leading them beyond that. So great question. I'll go ahead and continue on at this point to the next slide. Okay, so here's a sample battle. So as I mentioned before, different units get different types of roles. On the left side would be a battle where 3 infantry regiments are attacking a single infantry regiment. So with 3d6 against 1d6, it pretty simply breaks down as 3-to-1 odds. With that, the most likely outcome is an Allied victory with a high probability of destroying the Axis unit. So the Axis unit will only win about 3% of the time, but it could inflict a casualty 1/3 of the time. Now, if I draw your eyes to the right, that is a similar scenario, except the defending infantry regiment is positioned on a mountain and has expended a supply cube to dig in. So in this case, the supply cube would represent a variety of mines, barbed wire, constructing defensive positions, things like that. So each of those add a die to the defender's roll. So now, instead of, even though it's 3 units versus 1, still the superior position, the fact that the defender has placed themselves on a key terrain in the mountains, is now means that it's really a 1-to-1 odds, and in fact slightly favors the defender, since the defender will win on ties. So you're looking more at 47-53 in favor of the Axis. Furthermore, the entrenchment is going to absorb the first hit, so it's also going to increase the likelihood of the defending unit's survival. So even if they are defeated, they're more likely to survive. Okay, slide, please. Okay, so some joint operational impacts. This game's got some unique factors that make it fascinating. So as we have discussed a bit already, the Vichy French and their initial posture to defend and then stand down after they have appropriately, defended to appease the political situation that they're in. The Toulon event about the Axis player being able to redirect land units to try and increase the odds that the seizure of the fleet of Toulon is successful. Convoys. So players must plan out the deployment of reinforcements. They'll off board. It's not shown on the main map, but to the side of each board will be a location where players will put down their reinforcements bound for the ports, and those convoys have the opportunity to be interdicted and destroyed by air or sea. So they'll have to deal with going through minefields, deal with a opposing player choosing to use air, naval, particularly submarines, to attempt to sink transports or the escorts that are with them, so that it creates a risk factor or an unknown for how many of your troops will actually make it to the battlefield. The air battle is a fascinating duel of air power, and it's a bit of a seesaw back and forth until one side can gain a decisive advantage. The Allied player will have more air units overall. It's about a 13-to-9 split, but the Axis player initially has better position in interior lines. So there's an opportunity, if the Allied player is a little too forward, that the Axis player may be able to make the most of their position and attrit the Allied force down a bit. Then one thing I wanted to add, that I've recently added in, is the Southern Europe invasion delay chart. So this represents some of the strategic Axis goal here to stop the advance of the Allies. So significant or key to preventing their invasion of Southern Europe. So the way this works is it tracks 4 different metrics And if the Axis player can inflict damage across the joint force and in more than one of the domains, so if they inflict two, if they meet two of the requirements, then they can shorten the time of the game by one turn. So, for example, if they destroy 5 of the armor regiments and they destroy 3 of the capital ships, the 3 capital ships, then they can shorten the game from 10 turns to 9 turns. And what this is representing is even if the Allies take Tunis, they would have suffered so much damage along the way that they cannot smoothly transition to Operation Husky to take Sicily, but they have to take time to rebuild and thereby still achieve an effect of a delayed invasion of Southern Europe. I'll take a moment here to look at some of the comments. All right, so your play balance is on board strength levels, but does the game vary significantly from historic capabilities? Great question. I think it generally it stays true to a historic feel. So far in my playtesting, it's the Allies win much more often than the Axis. So there's a little bit of playability where tilting the scales a little bit to make sure that both players have a chance to achieve some of the effects. Generally, it stays pretty true to the historical effect. I've looked at the total number of troops involved and tried to model when they arrived and their presence to generally replicate history. So there was a moment in time when the Axis forces in Tunisia outnumbered the Allies, and I try and model that. So between turns 4 to 6 in the game, there's a window of opportunity where the Axis can really choose to make advantage of their seize the initiative token and try and inflict serious casualties that prevent the Allies from being able to move onward. Okay, so how did you model the 8th Army in the game? Another great question. I've got them coming in, entering at Tripoli with Montgomery on turn 6, so that gives 2 turns for the Axis player to try and make good of Rommel's Panzer Army Africa returning to Tunisia. When they do show up, it includes a 7. I think I've got 7 units right now, 2 armor regiments, a mechanized infantry regiment, 3 infantry regiments, and 6 supply to represent that there's the overwhelming supply, and they'll continue to get a supply a turn from off board, as well as 2 air groups and a cruiser squadron. So it's a significant force that shows up and can generally defeat anything the Axis leaves, unless the Axis leaves pretty much the entirety of Rommel's army to guard the Mareth line, the transition from Libya into Tunisia. However, the problem that they'll run into is time, where can they reach Tunis fast enough, or will they be delayed by a variety of strong points along the way? Okay, I mentioned air-land movement is an issue. Did you consider an overlay of air range lines on the map? Yes, so that's another thing that I've looked through with the area map. So what I've currently tried to mitigate the spaces is by giving the air zones. Obviously, if I have like 4 mountain spaces and 4 sea spaces, 4 sea zones, they would look very different because the sea zone is always going to be significantly easier to pass through for a maritime unit than 4 mountain spaces would be for a land unit. So what I've currently got is air zones that overlap a variety of multiple land and sea zones that give the air assets ability to operate at any zone in between there. So air units would have 2 movement points, and they start off in zone 0 where they're more able to do interceptions, and then they can go out to 1 to 2 zones away to do actual strikes. The main issue I'm running into is as I design the game, so that way air units that are at the edge of the zone, trying to make sure it makes sense on what they can reach, and the game breaking stuff that I'm continuing working to mitigate is when an air unit is at the edge of its zone and it should be able to do interception duty right next to it, but it can't because of the presence of an air zone line. So that's where I'm constantly modifying the board and the map to try and get where it is, and that's why my next attempt is the hexes to try and get everything to overlay perfectly. Great question. All right, so for the Southern Europe invasion delay, table Y, armor regiments when Allied armored divisions were rarely deployed in southern Italy. Great question. And, now that you bring that up, that's something I'm going to give it a second look to. In this, it's more so that the armor is important enough in North Africa, and there's few enough of them. But what I'm trying to model is a land, maritime, and air component, as well as the timing of it all being, if they're adjacency to Tunis. So bringing that up, I'll give another good look and see if maybe it should represent something different. If it should be more the defeat of airborne unit or the number of infantry units. So great question, and I'll give it a look. Okay, and then is there a component to assemble a plan beforehand, allocating elements and resources, and then enact at some point in the timetable a simple tug of war, friction erosion, enemy force? I think so. I think so. The first turn takes a little bit of time to get rolling because there's got to be setup to it. So the Axis player, when they do their setup, will place Vichy French troops, and they could array them in the strongest port locations at Iran, Algiers, and Casablanca, or they could spread them out further in at further ports that maybe are more likely if they think the Allied player is going to try and go for broke and get close to the landing or do their landings close to Tunis. So from the Axis side, you have that, and then the Axis do get a paratrooper as well that it's not part of the setup, but it's present in Sicily. So on turn one, the Axis can drop a paratrooper somewhere on the eastern side of Africa of the map to try and either be a roadblock or to just start digging in. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. Okay, so in summary, the Northwest African Campaign is a game in which teaches joint operations through pitting two players in an intense duel involving theater entry, decision making, and allocation of limited resources. There are many possible variations on strategy, which can make for an entertaining and educational experience, and which I'm happy to discuss further. The game is still under design and is scheduled to be completed in June of 2026. And slide again, please, sir. Okay, and then here are my references. So first off, I need to recognize my wife, Jenny Stillwell, for doing the game board art. And once again, a big thanks to Brandon Merle for giving me this opportunity and Dr. Sterrett for coaching me through this process. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time. And then I can also show you, I've got a couple scenarios that I've seen throughout the playtesting that I can kind of show. All right, scale-wise, what does each regiment represent? So each regiment, so I'm looking around 5,000 troops. I'm taking a little bit of game liberty, if you will, to scale down the size of forces involved to try and represent, to make it manageable. If I were to truly match it up, each piece would probably be more like a division. And then I'd get the core aspect involved a little more. And it's not, and I haven't written it off completely, but it's what I'm looking at. So an infantry regiment with accompanying combined arms support, artillery, enablers, engineers, things like that. That's what a regiment, a single unit will typically represent. So if you have 4 regiments working together, that would equal about a division strength, and there's a unit cap to each space on the board of 8. So if you max out an area with 8, that's like 2 divisions or having a corps operating in one area. All right, let me see here. Any other questions? Okay, all right, no more questions. If we could go to the slide, the first slide that shows the scenario possibilities. I think it's going to be one of the hidden ones. You might have to select it directly. If it does, if you're able to pull it up, then you should click. It should be a single click, and then it should be okay. Yeah, this is one of the hidden slides. This is talking about specific unit graphics and abilities. One of the things with this game is I've made it so the icons have got 2 sides: a more graphical side, and then a tactical, like NATO symbol side. So it can be flipped and played either way. So part of my goal is to make this game very easy for military professionals to use as a training tool to teach joint operations. And then the part of it is also make sure that anyone who can enjoy it without having to memorize all the NATO graphics. So this just shows air and land, and the next one shows sea. Have I read The Plane Cook and the Showman in the first UK, in the first army compared to the 8th UK Army? I have not read that. I'm going to write that down, though, and check that out. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. All right. I appreciate the compliment about the attention to detail and the historical accuracy. Thank you. All right, if you can go to the next slide, please. And then is there a slide that shows the landings with 3 different options? Is the order of battle strictly historical, or do you include options for could have been there but was redirected? It tends towards the historical. I'd say I have included some of the could have been there but was redirected with the Toulon fleet. I think that's a significant part. Other than that, I haven't gone into further forces that could have been present. But yeah, so as you see on this map here, the Allied player could do a thunder run to try and land forces as far east as possible, but the port of Bonn, which is the furthest east port they can grab, only has a port capacity of 1, so it'll slow them down a lot. Alternatively, you could land more so in Morocco, take a western approach, and slowly work your way over. You'll have a much stronger force, but you'll be running into a time issue. And the Axis player with Rommel's army could either dig in at the Merit line at the fortification that's seen on the bottom right of the map, or they could try to pull off Kasserine Pass and combine his forces with Arnhem's forces, which were already there, and perhaps coordinate better than the two did historically. Okay, let me see some other questions here. Okay, yep, so we talked about the historical versus could have been there. Let's see the next one here. We got, how does a turn process? Back and forth, impulses, phases, or one side does all and then passes? By the way, thank you for your time. Well, thank you, and thank you for your time tuning in. It means a lot to me. I put a lot of time into this, so it's nice to see some other people, be able to get to share it with other people. Okay, so how a turn progresses. It's definitely a seesaw. As the player with initiative chooses a domain, like the air domain, then they will choose whether they want to make their air moves first or make the opponent do their air moves first. They will both execute their air moves in order, and then after both have executed them, they'll resolve them. And then after that, they can move on to either the maritime or the land. So for starting off, if the Allied players said they wanted to choose the historical Algiers, Oran, and Casablanca landing sites, then they could start and say, all right, I'm going to do the air domain first to try to sink the Vichy French fleet that's in port in order to clear the way to land directly in the port. And then second, I'll do naval to clean up anything that the air missed. And then third, I'll do land to do the landing. And then with each step, the Axis player would have the chance to respond. The Vichy French will be under specific rules where they're grounded in their locations and can't move away from them. Okay, so except for airborne and garrison, I would say go 1 unit equals 1 division based on how you model the 8th Army. Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate that feedback. I'm going to look at that, and it's continually a seesaw of what each unit should represent. So thank you. And airborne attack is more of an effect than an effective physical attack. Garrison is more of a movement effect. Good point. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll make a note of that. All right. I will pause here for any further questions. But if not, I'm very appreciative for the time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thanks again for those who can make this possible.